Thanks, Anthony. I'm pretty sure I'll never look at cupcakes the same way again, so that's a good way to start. But again, you could go to lawandcrime.com to follow those top crime stories of the day and learn a little bit more about it and about those cupcakes. Let's go focus back now on our main case of the day. I am talking about the Geoffrey Willis case out of Michigan. Again, this convicted murderer who is now on trial for the second time. This is the second time we're covering him here on Law and Crime. This is his second trial. He is on trial for the abduction and murder of a woman named Jessica Heringa, a mother out of Western Michigan who went missing back in 2013. She disappeared from her gas station job. She worked at an ExxonMobil, and she was never seen. She was never heard from ever again. Her body has never been found. Now, that may be tricky in any kind of case, but here the prosecution is moving forward with their case, and the way they're doing that is based upon a lot of different circumstantial evidence, but also taking evidence from crimes that Mr. Willis did commit or may have committed and using it here. Remember, as I said, Mr. Willis was convicted last year in the shooting death of jogger Rebecca Bletch. Evidence from that crime scene is being used to connect him to the Heringa disappearance. Also, after this case, it's probably likely that Mr. Willis will face charges related to potentially kidnapping a teenager back in 2016. Evidence from that event is now being used to link him to the Heringa murder case. Now, that may seem all well and good, but is Mr. Willis the one who actually did this? He may be creepy, he may be a convicted murderer, but what is tying him to this crime? That's the question. So to help me talk a little bit more about this, I want to bring in criminal defense attorney Richard Tendler. Richard, it's great to have you back here on Law and Crime.
Great being here, Jesse. You know, I bought a cupcake this morning to have a little later. I think I'm going to pass on that as well.
Well, you know, that's another story for another day. But Richard, we got to talk about Geoffrey Willis, okay? And the thing is, there's no body, right? There's no body. None of Jessica Heringa's DNA is in Mr. Willis's van. In fact, there's not a lot of connection between the two. Now, here's what we do know. We know that Geoffrey Willis was a frequent customer of the ExxonMobil gas station. He knew Jessica. In fact, he told authorities the night she disappeared, he went to the ExxonMobil gas station and talked to her. But what did we learn yesterday? We learned from a detective Casher, who was one of the investigating officers. He spoke to Jessica Heringa's co-worker. This is Susan Follett, the woman that drove by the night Jessica disappeared and saw this mysterious silver van driven by this mysterious individual who may or may not have been Geoffrey Willis. And she said the person that she saw didn't look like a regular customer. That's reasonable doubt, right, Richard?
Absolutely. I mean, this just plays into the entire theme of this trial, where we had a judge let in a lot of evidence where 15 years ago this would never have happened. You know, the case law has changed over the last 15 years, where we're letting in evidence of prior bad acts, everything that is, quote, inextricably intertwined. And so it's just another piece of the puzzle where you've got a witness now saying, I never saw him there. And meanwhile, he's a frequent customer there. So I'd be all over it if I'm the defense.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no sympathy lost for Mr. Willis. He is a convicted murderer. He's extremely strange and bizarre character who had a computer filled with murder and rape videos, and he had a ton of different pornography. He had information about Jessica Heringa as well as his victim, Rebecca Bletch. There's no sympathy lost on him. But we're attorneys, you and I, and a lot of people out there know the law. You have to be proven guilty. You know, you're innocent until proven guilty. And the prosecution has to move forward with their case and prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he is responsible for the murder of Jessica Heringa. And we don't even know definitively if she's dead because we don't have a body. Richard, I want to stand by. I want to play for you right now, and for our viewers and for our listeners, this is the testimony of Lieutenant Michael Casher. This is the responding officer who went to the gas station when Jessica was reported missing. He's about to explain to you the crime scene, what he discovered when he went there, and it's extremely eerie. Take a look. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network and Law and Crime on Sirius XM Radio. I'm your host, Jesse Weber. You were just listening to the testimony of Lieutenant Michael Kasher in the Geoffrey Willis case. Remember, Geoffrey Willis is on trial for the abduction and murder of Jessica Heringa, a Michigan mother that disappeared one night in 2013 from her gas station job. Well, Michael Kasher was just explaining, arriving at this empty gas station, Jessica was nowhere to be found. There was no evidence of a struggle, and it looked like a very clean environment. Imagine just walking into this crime scene, and the woman was there 1 minute, and she's not there any longer. No one knows what happened to her. Her body has never been found. But the prosecution is moving forward with their case against Willis, and they said that he is the person that abducted her and killed her. I want to bring back in, excuse me, I want to bring back in criminal defense attorney Richard Tendler. So I got to ask you the million-dollar question. As we wait for the live feed back in the courtroom, we are going to be live in that Michigan courtroom in the Geoffrey Willis case. Will Mr. Willis, the defendant himself, take the stand? Now, the reason I ask this is because in his prior trial in the Rebecca Bletch murder case, he did take the stand and tried to explain away all of his behavior. Well, guess what? The jury didn't believe that. They convicted him of murder, and he's now serving a life sentence. But will he take the stand in this case?
If he's smart, and he doesn't take the stand here. Now, he may not be able to help himself because this is the kind of guy that has to explain everything as he did in the last trial. But if I'm the defense attorney, I'm going to strongly urge him not to testify. They don't have, there's a lot, it's all circumstantial, and it's all evidence of other bad crimes, other bad acts. And so I'm going to just implore that jury, hey, look, this is America. We believe, the system is the system. And the reason that prosecutors spent all this time talking about every other bad act that he's committed is because they have nothing here. Nothing at all, including a detective who walks in, and you would think there was some sign of a struggle when you have a kidnapping. So,
well, Richard, I don't know if there's nothing here. I mean, we'll talk about it more after our first break, but his van, or maybe with something that looked like his van, was spotted at the crime scene. He had all these photos of Jessica Heringa on his computer. There was blood found outside of the gas station. He has been implicated in the abduction of a teenager, or the potential abduction of a teenager, using that same silver van. He's been convicted in the murder of Rebecca Bletch using that same silver van. There are things that are kind of here, circumstantial, but like you said, there's no direct evidence, and that's really what makes this kind of a chilling, eerie case. And we're going to talk more about it, and after this short break, we're going to play you some more of the testimony of Lieutenant Michael Kasher, the investigator, the officer who went to that crime scene, and he's going to talk about what he discovered, including the presence of a gun battery cover to the laser sight of a gun. That battery cover, that gun, belonged to Geoffrey Willis's co-worker, and she said Geoffrey Willis stole it because that gun was found in his van. We'll talk more about it after this short break. Stay tuned. Law and Crime Network and Law and Crime on Sirius XM Radio. I'm your host, Jesse Weber. We're covering the Geoffrey Willis case right now. This is this bizarre case out of Michigan, an infamous case out of Michigan. It's all in the news media. Mr. Willis has been in and out of courtrooms, in and out of the news. That's because he's a convicted murderer. He was convicted last year in the shooting death of Rebecca Bletch, a jogger, in 2014. He's also been implicated in trying to kidnap a teenager back in 2016. Now he's on trial for 2013. It's being alleged that he kidnapped and murdered a Michigan mother named Jessica Heringa. She was last seen at her gas station job. Some witnesses have said that they saw a mysterious silver van driven by a mysterious individual at that crime scene shortly during the time when Jessica was last seen. And guess who owns a silver van? Geoffrey Willis. As we enter into this next phase of the case, and we are waiting for the live feed, we have a short report explaining what has happened so far. Our very own Aaron Keller here on Law and Crime did a really good job of explaining and reporting about what has happened and what we can expect. This is, again, the Geoffrey Willis case.
First, the 2013 disappearance of Jessica Heringa. Then, the 2014 murder of Rebecca Bletch. Authorities didn't get a break in either case until this terrifying 911 call.
I had to jump out of the car. How long ago did this happen?
A teenager said Geoffrey Willis tried to abduct her at gunpoint. She got away and called 911 from a nearby stranger's house. She did identify Willis's van, leading authorities to his doorstep. From there, police tied Willis to the Rebecca Bletch murder through DNA, but none of the items police recovered contained Herringa's DNA. Willis's wife couldn't explain a stash of bleach and detergent police think Willis used to cover up his tracks.
That's way too many.
In the years that you cleaned,
I would throw those away.
The link to Herringa finally came when police examined Willis's computer. There, authorities found more than 1,000 disturbing images of rape, murder, and pornography. Among them were a file folder labeled with an abbreviation for victims. Inside, images of Rebecca Bletch and Jessica Herringa.
This collection was the largest I've ever seen of murder, kidnapping, abduction, sexual assault that were extremely graphic. Videos that had been saved.
Several witnesses thought they saw a van like Willis's leaving Jessica Herringa's gas station on the date and night she disappeared. A co-worker said Willis flipped out when the Herringa disappearance came up one day.
He blew up on me and he was like, "You can't say that, you can't accuse me, I'll go to the front office and tell and get you in trouble and get you fired." So I was just like, whoa, man, we're just like, messing around.
Did any of your other coworkers have the same reaction as the defendant when you guys were kind of...
No, not at all.
A cousin claimed he helped Geoffrey Willis bury Jessica Herringa's body, but Herringa's body wasn't where the cousin said it would be. Herringa's mother thinks she might still be alive, even though Jessica hasn't been seen or heard from since April 2013. This is Aaron Keller for the Law and Crime Network.
Thank you, Aaron. There's a great report there on the Jessica Herringa murder case. We're talking about the Geoffrey Willis murder case here on Law and Crime on Sirius XM Radio. Again, I'm your host, Jesse Weber. So as we keep talking about, Geoffrey Willis is on trial for the abduction and murder of this young mother named Jessica Herringa, who disappeared from her ExxonMobil gas station job back in 2013. But despite the fact that Mr. Willis is a convicted murderer, despite the fact that he has been implicated in other crimes, there's no DNA from Jessica Herringa on his person, on his van. There's no linking the two of them together. We know that they've had interactions before at the gas station, but there's nothing really tying him so much to her. Maybe, maybe not. Let's talk a little bit more about it with criminal defense attorney Richard Tendler. Richard, here's my question to you. You made a good point before the break that you said there's no direct evidence tying Mr. Willis to this crime. But I ask you, how are the jurors who are listening to this entire case, how do they reconcile the following facts? Mr. Willis had a ton of bleach at his grandfather's house. So many bottles of bleach, so many cleaning supplies. Why was the gun that belonged to his coworker found in his van? The battery cover to the laser sight of that gun was found at the Jessica Herringa crime scene. Why did Mr. Willis have a computer filled with so many murder, kidnapping, sexual assault videos on it? That same computer had photos of Jessica Herringa on it. Also, we learned yesterday that outside of Mr. Willis's grandfather's house, there was a crumpled note. And when you open the note up, it had a long laundry list of things, including matches, gas can, sex toys. There was insulin shots, which can be used to incapacitate somebody. There was a statement that said her panties. How does the jury reconcile all of these different factors and say, well, there's no DNA evidence of her on him, but when you look at all these other things, that doesn't look good?
No doubt. And at the National Criminal Defense College, they teach us that those are what you call bad facts beyond change. And that's one of the things that the defense is going to have to grapple with as the next part of the trial comes on. Defense is going to have to probably I don't know how you can really explain that, appropriately. They have the ability that they have, that they have contact with Geoffrey Willis and they have his side of the story. So, and we don't have that. Nonetheless, what they're going to have to do, I think, sometimes you have these bad facts, and what I would do is sometimes just simply ignoring them and then try and hone in on one or two aspects where you can poke reasonable doubt. So perhaps, we'll see what kind of evidence the defense has, but perhaps they can say, you know what, we've got some evidence here that Geoffrey Willis wasn't there that day. He was over here. He was, something that they can give in the same way that these prosecutors are skillfully using these facts. Something has got to be around for the defense to say, you know what, we've got this aspect of it, and the same thing. Jurors are going to think, well, you know what? Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, I'll tell you, the defense is doing a more thorough job this time. They're much more active in cross-examining the witnesses than they were in the first Geoffrey Willis case when he was on trial for the murder of Rebecca Bletch. So we'll have to see. We'll also have to see if Mr. Willis takes the stand, and he's got a lot of explaining to do, with these kinds of things. And one of the things that is of note, as we try to understand what really happened to Jessica Heringa that night in April of 2013, we were playing you the testimony of Lieutenant Michael Kasher, an investigating officer who went to the ExxonMobil gas station. He knew something wasn't right. Jessica disappeared. She disappeared out of thin air. No one knows where she is. Her body has never been found. Again, authorities believe that Geoffrey Willis is the one who killed her. Now, listen very carefully. This was his testimony when he explains what he found, and what he noticed was a little bit strange if this was a robbery. And this didn't seem to be a robbery, but looked a lot more like a kidnapping. Take a look at testimony earlier in the Geoffrey Willis case.
Now,
Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network and Law and Crime on Sirius XM Radio on Channel 109. I'm your host, Jesse Weber. Thanks for joining us. You were listening to testimony there in the Geoffrey Willis case out of Michigan, our main trial, the main trial we've been focusing on. This is not your run-of-the-mill case. This is a case about a convicted murderer who's on trial for the second time. He is on trial right now for the abduction and murder of a woman named Jessica Heringa. She was a mother who disappeared from her gas station job one night in April of 2013. She has never been seen since. Her body has never been found, but the prosecution believes that Mr. Willis abducted her from that gas station job, killed her, and disposed of her. What you were just listening to was the testimony of Lieutenant Michael Kasher. He was from the Norton Shores Police Department. He investigated this crime scene, and what he found was that there was nothing missing. There was nothing stolen from the gas station. Miss Heringa's wallet, her keys, her cash, they were all there. So it didn't really look like a robbery. It looks a lot more like a kidnapping. But let's talk a little bit more about it with criminal defense attorney Richard Tendler. Richard, you heard what Mr. Kasher said. He said that there was nothing missing. Didn't appear to be a robbery. So it looks like she was taken. I mean, why would all of her stuff be there? But here's the question I got to ask you. There are people who look at this case, and there's even family members of Miss Heringa, who believe, or at least hold out hope, that Jessica's still alive somewhere. What do you say to these people that the argument is, you know what, we have to presume that she's not?
Well, I mean, you've got a mom claiming that her daughter's still around, and obviously this is a mother's worst nightmare, that her daughter's not around, and they're holding out hope profusely that perhaps she's still around. So, it'll be interesting to see whether the defense does anything with that information. But, yeah, the way it appears is that, the only thing on the defense side, and I hate to go on the defense side again, but, the one thing you can say on the defense side is that maybe it's not a kidnapping, and maybe she got into somebody else's van and did this all on her own. It's a little far-fetched.
Well, to touch upon that, real quick, what did you make of the defense's theory when they said earlier in the case, look, she had a drug problem, she had a drug dealer, she was involved with nefarious characters, maybe they had something to do with her disappearance. Was there any credibility to that argument?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You believe that?
Well, you don't know. You just don't know. You're dealing with somebody who's on drugs. Their behavior's erratic all the time. They're hanging out with bad characters. These are people that, do things that are, unexplainable, and do things that, have a severe lack of judgment. So yeah, you've got to go off on that, and yeah, there may be something to that. So when you're on drugs, when you are out doing things that you should not be doing, you're hanging out with people that are the wrong crowd, and you're doing things potentially that you can't explain. So who knows if she met her drug dealer outside of the store and needed to talk to him or needed to do something, and
well. We heard from an eyewitness, Susan Follett. Okay, now she was interviewed by Detective Kasher, and she said, and we heard her on the stand, and we're about to play you her testimony. She worked with Jessica, and she said she saw this silver van driven by a guy with short hair, almost no facial hair, and blonde highlights, drive into the gas station, stay there a few minutes, and then drive away. She felt something was very eerie about it. She felt something wasn't right. Now, she didn't say that this was a drug dealer. She didn't know who this person was necessarily. Now, we're all assuming that this is Geoffrey Willis because we've heard other testimony from people say that Geoffrey Willis around this time looked very different than what he looks like right now. And he may have had, some witnesses have said he had blonde highlights and he had much shorter hair and he maybe didn't have as much facial hair. But it's interesting because when Detective Kasher interviewed her, she said it didn't look like a regular customer. And we know that Geoffrey Willis was a regular customer. So it's an interesting little aspect. I want to play right now the testimony of Susan Follett, this eyewitness. And she's going to explain to you what she saw and what she heard the night Jessica went missing when she drove by that gas station. Take a look. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network and Law and Crime on Sirius XM Radio. I'm your host, Jesse Weber. We're playing you testimony from the Geoffrey Willis case out of Michigan, a convicted murderer who is on trial for the abduction and murder of a new woman, a woman named Jessica Heringa, a Michigan mother that disappeared from her gas station job in 2013. What you were just listening to was the testimony of Susan Follett, a co-worker of the victim, who drove by the gas station the night Jessica went missing and saw what she just said, what you just heard, something didn't feel right. And she started crying because she saw this silver van pull up by the gas station, and the prosecutors are saying that that van was driven by Geoffrey Willis, and inside that van was Jessica Heringa. He kidnapped her from her gas station job and ultimately killed her. I want to bring back in Richard Tendler. Richard, what did you make of Susan Follett's testimony?
In a lot of respects, it's quite damaging for the defense. You had they didn't object to a bunch of hearsay in there. Her conversations with her husband at the time, this whole notion that the whole thing was eerie, I guess that was coming in, but I would have tried to keep some of that out. I mean, she's drawing conclusions and she's really just there to report what she saw or what she did not see. I would have liked to have seen the defense, kind of try and keep her testimony not as expressive as she was.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think she's crying.
It has an effect. It has an effect on jurors. They see it because they see a woman who felt maybe she could have done more. Maybe if she felt something wasn't right, maybe she could have done more. That's what maybe she's feeling in her heart. And what I want to play right now is a continuation of her testimony where she explains a little bit more about the person driving the van. And again, I want all of our listeners and viewers who are listening and watching this, she gets very emotional on the stand because she worked with the victim and maybe she felt that there was something more she could have done. Again, this is more testimony from the Geoffrey Willis case. This is a co-worker, Susan Follett, that worked with the victim. Take a look. That's the testimony of Susan Follett describing what she saw and what she heard the night Jessica Heringa disappeared in April of 2013. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network at Law and Crime on Sirius XM Radio. I'm your host, Jesse Weber. Again, we are covering the Geoffrey Willis case out of Michigan, the man who's on trial for the abduction and murder of Miss Heringa. It's alleged that he kidnapped her from her gas station job on that night, and Susan Follett was explaining what she saw when she drove by. She saw this mysterious silver van, and she's describing what the individual looked like who was driving the van. Again, I'm here with Richard Tendler. Richard, I think the identity of that driver becomes a big issue. It's been described by other witnesses that, and her in general, that she said the person that was driving it had blonde highlights, short hair, maybe even not a beard or clean shaven. If you look at Geoffrey Willis today, he has a little bit of medium-length hair, a full beard, and no blonde highlights. But you've heard different testimony about what he may or may not have looked like during this period. What do you make of it?
I mean, if I'm the defense, I'm going to say that back then, the way she described him with the blonde highlights, he looked even more identifiable than he does today. So some people, for example, have certain characteristics about them that you can remember more easily than others. He looks like a regular person now. He didn't look like a regular person back then, according to her testimony. So I'm going to try and use that and say, hey, if they really, if he was that distinct looking, then you certainly would have had other people, clearly identifying him back then.
Well, we've heard witnesses who said that he was 300 pounds, that he did have blonde highlights at that time, or at least maybe had blonde highlights at that time. So it becomes a question for the jury. What did Mr. Willis look like at that time? Was he the person driving that silver van or not? We'll maybe get those answers, maybe not. But that's what we're here analyzing on Law and Crime. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to hear about evidence tracking Mr. Willis's movements the night in question, the night Jessica Heringa disappeared. We'll be right back. To the Law and Crime Network and Law and Crime on Sirius XM Radio. I'm your host, Jesse Weber. Thanks for joining us. We are covering the Geoffrey Willis case out of Michigan. We're waiting for that live feed to begin in the courtroom. We expect the prosecution to rest their case. And what will the defense ultimately do? Will they call Geoffrey Willis, the defendant, on the stand? Maybe. Again, Mr. Willis is on trial, the second time that we've covered him here on Law and Crime. This is the second trial he's on for the abduction and murder of a woman named Jessica Heringa. She disappeared from her gas station job back in 2013. Prosecutors and investigators believe that Mr. Willis abducted her from her gas station job, killed her, and disposed of her. What I want to play for you right now as we wait for that live feed, this is the testimony of Sergeant Jim McDonald. He talked about the defendant's cell phone. And what can a cell phone be used for besides making phone calls? Well, when you make those phone calls, it tracks your movements. So Sergeant Jim McDonald used activity from Geoffrey Willis's cell phone to track where he was the night of Jessica's disappearance and the day after. Take a look.